To hell with what counts as classified. People need to know what happened here. I don't know what the government was after when they started their experimental zoo here, but I need to let people know what it could do to humans and what it did to my friend. My name is Greg and I operate the lighthouse out here. I can't really say where, but let's just say it's an island off the southeastern coast that isn't on the map. I'm the kind of guy that enjoys my alone time, so it's a perfect job for me. Boris is the primatologist, so he's the one working with the monkeys. There's about 500 of them here, and they roam free. They usually like to keep their distance from me, and I keep my distance from them. Boris feeds them, so they like it more. I don't like to pick a fight unless they get too curious near the lab or start chewing on the wires to my satellite TV. Boris's job is the monkeys. Mine is the lighthouse. Now, Boris doesn't bother me much, but sometimes our paths cross for meals. It's just him and I here, and occasionally some government types when they decide to helicopter in from the oil rig to drop off supplies. I don't ask a whole lot of questions, and I think they like that about me. To tell you the truth, I think the reason I'm here is so that Boris doesn't go insane. I think any man would if they spent as much time with monkeys as he does. He seems to know a lot about them, and he's taught me a little over the last few months. He calls them an old world monkey. But I saw something I shouldn't have, and now my cozy island living has turned into a nightmare I will never forget. I woke up to the sound of new orders printing from the fax machine. A sheet of paper coming directly down from the government on high. But this time was different. Whatever the page said had disturbed Boris. He was pacing around the room, muttering to himself as he read it. I couldn't hear what he was saying. He then sat quietly in the corner, both hands running through his thinning hair. This was the dance we did when our paths did cross. I would pretend to mind my own business while he wrestled with some secret government task on the other side of the room. I kept one eye on him over the book I was reading. He got up from his seat, headed straight to the kitchen, and pulled out a bottle of liquor from the shelf. His hands trembled as he poured a drink. Things are going to get dark out here, Greg. He slid the paper across the table. I maintained eye contact as I placed my book on it. Look, man, you and I both know that we signed something that says I really shouldn't look at that, I said. He picked up the glass, irritated that I wouldn't look. He returned to the other side of the room and slumped back in his chair. It didn't take long before I picked up the book off the page. Curiosity got the best of me, wondering what the big secret was. I lifted my book. I was drifting towards the page. There was a single line of text. Don't feed the animals. That's all. This is what made him so upset. The monkeys seem to have plenty to eat without Boris feeding them. I have personally seen them eat coconut corn seeds. So what if he stopped feeding them those yellow egg-shaped dry biscuits? Boris called a chow. He knew I'd looked. They want a famine, Greg, and they will get more aggressive as the island's resources dwindle. The monkeys are going to get restless. He was staring at me, as if waiting for the gravity of his words to register on my face. He continued talking. You understand that monkeys are not so different from humans, genetically and behaviorally. Remember when I captured that alpha? What was his name? Lucky. I nodded along, remembering Lucky. Boris had told me a little about him. He was an alpha male. You need to understand that a government has a direct interest in learning how its citizens will react to certain stimuli, but they cannot perform these experiments in real time with real humans living in the real world. I nodded, not fully putting together what he was trying to say. I had sent him away. That's what they asked me to do. They said his troop and another one would go to war. They wanted to see what would happen if the alpha disappeared. They were right, too. There was no war. Boris's voice was colored with contempt. He took another drink, swallowed, and continued. Lucky's troops terrorized the other troops. Greg, don't you get it? They had me take out a rebel leader. The government extrapolates the data I collect to the real world. Now, I didn't want to know any of this. I'm just the lighthouse guy, you know. Why include me now? The data is in the monkeys, he said, finishing his drink. They want to start a famine here so that if and when a famine hits the States, they'll be ready. Either that or they got defunded and were out of a job. Boris was clearly distressed. He paced the room, trapped in his own world. I think he'd come to enjoy working with the monkeys here. He'd humanize them, and maybe I have too. I know I said that the monkeys are Boris's problem, but I do find myself watching them throughout the night. I've learned a lot about monkeys since I've started working here. I could almost see why a government would find value in this kind of experiment, as unethical as it may be. There's highly organized social structures not so different for humans. Their young are dependent on their mothers for much of the beginning of their lives. They live in groups where they depend on others for protection, resources, and social bonds. Monkeys communicate, and they resolve conflict. Boris himself said that they are the most intelligent animal in the world, maybe second only to humans. Now, I know I sound like I've got island fever. These monkeys are 2 feet tall, covered in brown fur, and have long tails. They are nothing like humans, and their behaviors cannot be used to understand human societies. I know what you're thinking. You think that humans are too technologically and socially advanced, but when I try to dehumanize them, I can't. If you look at one of their faces, you can tell they're experiencing life on an advanced level. I've watched a monkey mourn the death of a family member. I've watched a mother care for their young and teach them the ways of the forest. Maybe it's not so far off after all. And it started to make sense to me. If you understand something fundamental about monkeys, you can understand something fundamental about humans. So the government created a zoo, but now they wanted to understand a global famine. There must be some kind of mistake, I said. Boris stopped in his tracks, picked up the faxed paper from the table, crumbled it in his hands. It's an ethics violation. There's not enough to gain in all the behavior-based science to warrant this kind of experiment, he said. He dialed Major Acosta on the bulky satellite phone. I heard his unwavering voice emitting from the speakers. The conversation was over before Boris could even get a word in. Do it. Now is not the time for insubordination. And then the line went dead. He's an asshole, I said. They want to destroy everything we've built, Boris said. They built an island for this, costing who knows how much money. It's just inhumane. He sat back down, defeated, and poured himself another drink. Well, let's keep feeding him, I said. We'll take the next resupply helicopter back to the oil rig, and we'll tell them we refuse to carry out the project together. Boris sighed. I offered my hand. He shook it, but the weight of our next few weeks started to weigh on me. This island was going to change fast. I lit a cigarette. If you stayed up all night and only ever talked to one guy on an island full of monkeys, then you would smoke too. We took inventory. We had 2 days left of chow biscuits for the monkeys. Maybe 4 if we started rationing. Now we had enough food for ourselves for several weeks. The government wasn't going to send us out of here if we couldn't feed ourselves, and the weather was often rough. Visits were rare and expensive. The resupply day came and went, the chow ran out, and Boris started spending more time in the lab instead of observing the monkeys and taking notes on his tablet. We decided to only ever leave the lab together. Otherwise, the monkeys may start getting bold. Boris asked if he could come up to the top of the lighthouse with me. I agreed. Maybe it would be nice to have some company, but the moment we left the lab, we were spotted by a troop. They watched from the trees as we made our way to the lighthouse. A male that Boris called Pinocchio walked towards us. Boris shouted for him to leave, but he didn't even flinch. He stared directly into our eyes, and when he was just a few feet away, he bared his teeth. I knew this monkey was trying to intimidate us. He was hungry. If I've learned anything from being around them for these last few months, it's that the best way to avoid trouble is to just give them what they want. So we showed him our open palms, showing him we had no food. This was met with a grunt. Then a performative lunch. We continued to walk at our own pace. Speeding up showed that we were afraid. He followed closely until we got to the lighthouse and closed the door behind us. When we got to the top, I started on my daily maintenance checks. Boris called me over, pointing at the ground below. Pinocchio was bullying one of the other monkeys who'd followed us. He was pulling out his hair, biting, and showing his teeth. The other monkeys started fighting back. They lunged at each other, biting at each other's faces. And then it was over. Pinocchio had one. We watched him drag the corpse into the woods. Oh, one less mouth to feed, Boris said somberly. Morning, King. Boris had told me stories of the monkeys all night. The warmth coming through the thick windows, it felt nice on my skin. Boris was looking thoughtfully out at sea. Something caught his attention down below. Do you see that tree? Boris asked. Yeah, it looks popular, I replied. Seeing monkeys grooming each other and moving throughout its branches. That wasn't there before. That tree. It shouldn't be there. Isn't that in the middle of the ATV road? Okay, you need to get some sleep, old man. You're up all night and you're not used to it. I sent it. That tree was filled with life. What looked like hundreds of monkeys on its branches. You see those fruits? This tree's full of them. Were those figs? I asked. I can't tell from up here. Let's check it out, Boris replied. We put on our boots and descended the winding staircase. Why had Boris said that the trees shouldn't be there? They'll ignore us while they eat, Boris said. If Boris believed it, it was probably true. And they did ignore us. We were able to approach them without any of them paying us any mind. Up close now, it was somehow beautiful, if I'm being honest. Monkeys swung playfully from branch to branch, carefree. They looked happy as they were, snacking on their fruit. There's more than one troop in the tree, Boris said while clearly trying to count moving animals. There has to be. Pinocchio's troop only has 200 monkeys. This is closer to 400 or more. I think every monkey on the island is in this tree. Why aren't they fighting? You're asking me. I replied. If there's more than one troop in the tree, there would be an all-out war. So why aren't they fighting? His tone was anxious and excited at the same time. I'm sure that this was very abnormal behavior for these monkeys, having watched them fight over anything from a coconut to who gets to groom who. But it was a famine, and they had found plenty of food in this tree. Maybe it's like Christmas Day in World War II, when the Axis and Allied troops on the front line stopped fighting each other, I said, hypnotized. By the mass movement of monkeys, Boris started walking toward it. What are you doing? I asked. Me? I want to grab some fruit. I can't tell what it is, Boris said without looking back. He wasn't far from the tree now, and I was worried that the monkeys would lunge at him for trying to steal their precious food. But they didn't even notice. They were totally in their own world. Boris reached up and took a fruit from the tree, and the tree went silent. The hooting and excited grunts from the monkeys just stopped. Boris sensed the change in the air, and slowly he turned to look up at the monkeys. They were no longer jumping, playing, or grooming. All eyes were on Boris. Hundreds and hundreds of pairs of eyes looking down at him. And then silently, with the coordination of a hive mind, each monkey started to jump up and down from the branches. Boris ran as the first monkey touched the ground, and I ran beside him. I shouldn't have looked back, but their coordination was like anything I'd ever seen before. I had to look, and there were hundreds of monkeys chasing us. Their teeth were bared, the universal sign that they wanted blood, our blood, and we barely made it through the door to the lab. We slammed it shut just in time to hear the weight of their bodies crash into the other side, and the sound was loud enough to echo off the back wall of the metal lab building. What the hell is going on? I said, both of us pushing a heavy table across the ground and bracing it against the door. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it, Boris said. They continued to ram the door. It was like they didn't feel it at all when their heads banged up against it. Soon enough, they were on all sides of the lab building, their nails scraping against the windows and walls. We were surrounded. Eventually, they would figure out how to break the window. And once they got in, they would tear us limb from limb for stealing their fruit. We reinforced what we could. For now, it was safe. Boris was sitting in a chair, playing with a mysterious fruit in his hands, just staring at it intently. The light from a bare bulb reflected off its skin when Boris turned it. I could see a swirling orange pattern at the center. For a moment, the light caught on the small hairs of the fruit, and it almost seemed like they writhed with a mind of their own. You should try this. It's actually pretty good, Boris said, and I was horrified to see that he was chewing. Stop, I said. We don't even know what that is. I tried to wrestle it from his hands. We're on a remote island thousands and thousands of miles from a hospital. Spit that out. Well, the monkeys are eating it. They must know what it is, their bodies. They are small and their metabolism is fast. If it was poisonous, they would all be dead. You're not a monkey, Boris. If you get sick, I can't help you, I said. Oh, you're lost, he said, and took another bite. I watched him swallow. He stopped chewing abruptly. The fruit rolled from his hand and onto the table. His mouth opened, and a narrow brown tendril rolled out from the back of his throat. It tapered down the length of it, and at the end, it split off into two branches like a snake's tongue. Boris's eyes widened as he looked down at the tendril coming from his mouth, and then the tendril sucked itself back down his throat. His eyes went blank, and he slumped in his chair. His hands just dangled at his sides. A second later, he just woke up. He quickly sat up, took a deep breath, and opened his eyes. He lay his palms flat on the table, and then turned to look at me. His eyes were yellow and crusted over. "Are you all right?" I asked, and he was looking right at me as he picked up the fruit again. His movements were jerky and mechanical. "You don't look all right," I said, taking a step towards the satellite phone. "You should try this." "You know, it's actually pretty good," he said, his voice now low and rasping. His breathing became labored like he just ran a marathon. "Boris, you need a doctor. You're allergic to that fruit or something. Try to make yourself throw up while I call the major," I said, trying to stay as calm as I could. I stopped once he stood up. His legs were too straight, and he was looking straight at the ground. A strand of yellow drool escaped his mouth. I had a hand on the phone when he raised his head, and he bared his teeth at me like a monkey. I backed up into the desk, and I knocked some papers to the ground. Boris held out the fruit for me to eat. Orange juices ran down his arm, and I ran to the bathroom, and I locked the door. The only weapon I could find was the heavy ceramic lid to the back of the toilet. I held it high, waiting for him to try and crash through the door, and I waited. There was a sound coming from the far side of the lab. I held my ear into the door, and on the other side was chaos. Glass breaking, furniture getting knocked over. I backed up. There was a thud. The door rattled on its hinges. Another thud, and a hand appeared from below the door. A monkey hand. It clawed at the base of the door, nails scratching off the paint, and it grabbed at anything it could blindly. It found the bath mat on the floor and disappeared with it under the door, and more monkey hands appeared. I was terrified. I looked around for a way out, seeing sunlight only through one possible exit, an air vent high up on the wall behind the toilet. It was square with a metal shuttered cover. If I got the shuttered cover off, maybe I could squeeze through it to the outside. I stood on top of the toilet, and I pried it with my fingers. No luck. I couldn't get the screws out either. Boris was rattling the doorknob on the other side of the door, and the monkeys slapped the ground and walls blindly from under the door. I heaved the heavy lid from the toilet at the vent with all my strength. The metal bent, and it released two of the screws. I tore the cover off, grabbed at the opening with both my hands, and I pulled myself up. I could fit my head and just wore my arms through, and then I pushed off the inside wall of the bathroom with my feet to get my chest out. Luckily, there were no monkeys outside waiting for me. I shimmied all the way out, and I managed to get to the ground without hurting myself. I was full of adrenaline now, and halfway to the forested edge when I looked back. Boris's face stared at me from the wall. He was standing on the toilet in the bathroom. "Why don't you want to try it? It's actually pretty good." "Hey, son," in a strange, raspy voice that was not his own. His eyes were totally consumed by the cloudy yellow. Now brown tendrils emerged from his mouth and nose, and they spread over the edges of the hole. His body couldn't fit through behind him. He disappeared, and in his place came a flood of rabid-looking monkeys, and I ran as fast as I could. Low branches cut my skin as I tore through the woods. The monkeys jumped from tree to tree right behind me. I was more scared than I've ever been in my life. One of them was catching up. It was Boris. His closed fist pushed off the dirt to propel him forward impossibly fast. He smiled through the trees at me while running on all fours, but I knew where he was going. When I made it to the cliff, I didn't have time to take a moment and calculate my jump. I jumped as hard into the water as I could, and I just shut my eyes on impact. I stayed under the water for as long as I could hold my breath, waiting for the monkeys or Boris to jump in after me. They didn't, and I surfaced. They stayed in front of the setting sun on the cliff above. Boris was the tallest among them. He turned silently to leave, and the monkeys just followed. I swam around the island until I found a shoreline, and I collapsed, exhausted, onto the beach. Night started to fall. I needed to move, get as far away from here as I possibly could. I never explored this side of the island before. It was dead silent. Everywhere you looked was silent. Nothing seemed to live out here. No birds, not even insects. I walked for as long as I could. I took a break by a boulder, and I fell asleep with my head in my hands. I woke up at sunrise. I didn't know where I was. I could hear the faint sound of monkeys in the distance. The island was too small to stay hidden for long, and it was a miracle I hadn't been found yet. I looked up and I saw something moving in the trees. There was no mistaking it. It was a drone. It flew silently in the sky through the trees about 10 feet above me. It then zipped off into the sky, quickly obscured by the clouds. Had I imagined that? I didn't think Boris had a drone, but my primary concern was not this. I was thirsty. I needed to get back to camp now. I decided to climb a tree to get my bearings. I didn't even know what part of the island I could be in. From the tree, though, I could see the lighthouse. In the water nearby, I saw a small boat approaching on the horizon, the Coast Guard. I climbed down a tree as fast as I could, and I ran towards the boat. I didn't care how much noise I made. I had to make it to them before Boris and his gang of rabid monkeys did. There was one person standing by the boat on the beach, and I ran down the embankment and onto the sand, staggering across the beach. I called out, screaming that they needed to get back on the boat. The person didn't turn around, though. Finally, I got close enough to put my hand on his shoulder. At my touch, he turned around, and his mouth was full of writhing brown tendrils. He held out his hands in front of him, and he walked toward me with yellow eyes. They beat me to him. Boris emerged from the embankment. He approached on all fours, with hundreds of monkeys behind him, and it was over. I knew I was going to die. The walk back, it was truly full of nightmares. I was surrounded on all sides. Most of the monkeys walked by my side rigidly. Some of the other monkeys had completely forgotten how to walk, their faces dragged in the dirt as they pushed themselves forward with their legs. The guy from the Coast Guard crawled along the ground, throwing his hands in front of him and dragging the rest of his body. Their eyes were all that identical, yellow, swirling clouds. I realized they were bringing me to the tree, the one with the fruit that had corrupted Boris. They formed a semicircle at the base, and I looked closer at the tree. It was all wrong. The bark had no texture. It was smooth all the way up. The leaves were all different shapes. The branches were full of hairy fruits. This was not a tree. This was something pretending to be a tree. A hole opened at my feet, dirt falling into it. As it opened wider, the monkeys closed in behind me. I tried to make a run for it, but it was no use. They bit and scratched at my skin until I returned to the ridge. The hole was several feet deep now, and it smelled like death. The bottom was filled with bones, all white and picked clean, and they pushed me in. I crashed to the bottom. Monkey bones, that's what they were. I stood up, and I tried to get out, and a monkey bit my finger, and I fell back into the hole. They tossed handfuls of dirt on top of me, and little by little, they were burying me alive. I tried to stand, but I couldn't get my footing on all the bones. No, it was something else. There was something holding me down, I realized. A fleshy brown tendril was wrapped around my waist. It pulled me towards the ground, and the bones cut into my skin from below. And to my horror, I put it all together. This tree, it was like one giant muscle, and its roots were tendrils below the earth. Another tendril burst from the wall of dirt to my side. It wrapped itself around my neck, and it squeezed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even scream. I tried to get it off, but it was just too strong, and the monkeys continued to throw more dirt on me. The hole was filling up around me now, and the light was fading. Desperate, I managed to get my hand in my pocket, and I found my lighter. I held it below the tendril at my neck, and immediately I felt it let go. And I gasped for air, and then dirt got in my mouth and I coughed. I lit the flame under the tentacle again, around my waist, and it just slithered away. I stood up, reached back up to the edge, and I waited for more monkeys to bite my fingers. Nothing. I pulled myself up. The monkeys had backed off. I held the lighter out in front of me, and the light from it reflected off hundreds of yellow eyes. The monkeys were watching me, captivated by the flame. Maybe the parasite was terrified of fire, and it released them at that moment. Something primal registered on the monkeys' faces, and I think that in that moment, they didn't push me back into the hole because I had defeated death. I was now to be respected, but this moment did not last long. The parasite regained control. The monkeys split apart. Boris walked forward, the guy from the Coast Guard behind him. I held up the lighter towards them as they approached, and they paused. I didn't know how much longer this flame would last. It was a very old lighter, so I found a piece of dry brush from the ground. Lit it on fire, held up the burning bush like a torch. I brought it to the tree, and I lit the lower branches on fire too, and then an earthquake rumbled below me. The ground beneath stirred as the leaves burned. The tree rose to even higher heights, exposing a network of tendrils that were formerly deep below the earth. The tree lumbered off with thundering steps away from me, leaving only a cloud of smoke behind. I held my torch up, keeping the monkeys at a distance, until I made it to the water. The boat was anchored just a few feet out to sea. I pulled the anchor from the sand, and I trudged out in the water while making sure to keep my torch from getting wet. It followed me to the shore. Smoke rose from the island as I drove the boat in towards the oil rig. A civilian fishing boat found me at sea a few days later and dropped me at the oil rig. They took me to the med bay for treatment. One of the medics said I would have died from advanced hepatitis B if they hadn't got to man time. Major Acosta was reading by my bed when I woke up one morning. "So you met the true subject of our zoo," he said. "What?" I said, disoriented, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Boris wasn't supposed to eat one, that half-baked dessert. We engineered it as a means to facilitate cooperation. It worked too, as you could tell. What we did not expect was for the tree to stand up and walk away. "No one thought it would work on plan," he said, and I was speechless. The island was never a zoo for monkeys. I was just a mouse that didn't know it had just been released into a snake's enclosure. They have blood on their hands and they know it. What the hell did they intend to do with a serum like this? I had to sign a book's worth of documents swearing myself to secrecy, but I just had to tell someone. If a tree that doesn't look like a tree sprouts out of the ground overnight, don't eat the fruits. What do you do when a monster finds you? You pray. Does anyone remember what the old creepypasta forums were like? Most of the stories there, they're pretty much gone now. But there's one story that's been stuck in my head lately. I need to know if anybody else remembers it because I think that this one may be real. This is how it went. In 1982, the small town of Walden, TX was haunted by a strange series of events that would eventually lead to the residents abandoning the town for good. To this day, no one knows what caused these events. The official county report says that a fire at a local factory led to chemicals leaking into the soil. Federal agents evacuated the town and just never allowed anyone to come back. However, there's no evidence that supports this theory. There are no records of any federal agency ordering an evacuation. The County Fire Bureau was never told about a massive fire in Walden, and the few survivors of the incidents each gave different reasons for why Walden was suddenly abandoned. One thing that everyone agreed on, though, is that the first incident happened on the evening of October 7th. A woman out walking her dog discovered the remains of 5 students behind the Walden Public High School. 4 of the students, whose names were never revealed, had been found nailed to inverted crucifixes. The crucifixes had been arranged in a circle facing inwards. The 5th student was found at the center of the circle. His torso cut open on his chest were carved the words "Father Flies." The subsequent police investigations into these deaths determined that all 5 deaths were self-inflicted. The crucified students didn't show any signs of struggle as they were nailed to the crosses. And the fifth student, well, was found to have mutilated himself on his own. This discovery left the police dumbfounded. They couldn't find any reason why these 5 young men had chosen to die in such a horrific manner. Other townsfolk started accusing the deceased students of being part of a cult, although no proof of this was ever found. The police would not have the chance to further investigate these deaths. Because the week following the discovery of the bodies, a certain madness seemed to suffocate the small town. It started small at first. Officers on patrol were called in to deal with more bar brawls or domestic disturbances than usual, but things quickly escalated. One of the officers, who was willing to speak out years later, described an incident he'd been called to. A fight at a local pool hall had escalated into an all-out brawl that involved almost everyone inside. He would later testify that he'd gone in expecting the usual couple of shiners, some broken bottles, maybe a few arrests, nothing a night in the drunk tank or the couldn't fix. However, the pool hall was dead silent when he arrived. No music, no crowd outside, not even a light on. He parked his car out front and made his way to the door, watching for movement through the windows. All he could see were flies clinging to the glass. He began to suspect that there was nothing but the flies inside. He would have thought that the call was some sort of prank, but seeing the pool hall this empty at night was unusual all on its own. He thought he should at least check in on the owner. As he walked through the door, he noticed a lone man sitting at the bar. He would describe the man as drinking a beer as if he didn't have a care in the world. There were flies swarming around him, and a kitchen knife sticking out of his back. According to the officer on scene, the man had turned to look at him, flashing a chilling smile. And it was at that point the officer finally saw the rest of the pool hall. He would describe it as a war zone. Tables were broken. Decorations had been knocked off the walls and the bodies. They were all beaten, bloody, torn apart and scattered across the floor, each one of them grinning from ear to ear as if they enjoyed every minute of their horrible deaths. Their corpses were already covered in maggots, with buzzing flies crawling across their blood-spattered skin. The sight of the carnage made the officer freeze. The man at the bar simply raised his glass to a toast and chugged down the last of his beer. When he finally found his voice, he ordered the sole survivor to get down on the ground, but the man ignored him. Instead, the man simply stood up and grabbed the nearest pool cue, and then, still grinning from ear to ear, he rushed at the officer. It took 7 bullets to stop the man, but by then he'd already caused enough damage to put the officer in the hospital. The officer would later say that he didn't think any man could have taken 7 rounds and kept on coming, but he swore up and down that the man simply didn't stop until his arms were nearly torn off by the rounds. He also insisted that the man at the bar had not been the only other person at the scene. Later, the local police were never able to verify the presence of any other survivors of the pool hall, but the officer insisted that he'd seen another man standing by the back of the bar. He'd said he didn't get a good look at him. He described the other man as tall. He was dressed in all black with a white collar, like a priest. The officer claimed that he'd only seen the stranger for a second before he just disappeared. But he would not be the last to see this mysterious figure. Following the incident at the pool hall, the violence in Walden continued to escalate. The death toll continued to rise. More people came forward with stories about this tall, dark figure. Another Walden survivor reported seeing a priest in the crowd after a police standoff that ended in 8 deaths. A young woman had taken her husband's gun and gone on a killing spree, shooting him, her in-laws, and one of the neighbors who'd come to investigate. The local police had arrived on scene to try and defuse the situation, but the woman simply started screaming nonsense. The witness can only make out a single phrase: "Father flies and is hungry." She took down 2 officers before they were forced to open fire. The witness would describe seeing a figure in the crowd in the aftermath of the shooting. A figure he did not recognize, who towered over everyone else. He described him as dressed like a priest, and yet wrong. He was too pale, with large black flies crawling all over his face. He almost looked like a walking corpse. According to the witness, the figure just disappeared. In the coming days, sightings of this figure continue to grow. Survivors of Walden often described a similar figure dressed like a pastor, bearing witness to the acts of violence that were quickly consuming the town. No man fitting his description had been sent in town before the violence started. None of the survivors have identified him as a local. On October 19th, a fire started at the local police station. People think it was arson. Traces of gasoline were found in one of the holding cells. It was the cell that held Sean Walters, who'd been booked a few hours ago for aggravated assault. He'd been involved in 2 violent altercations during the week prior to his arrest, but it's unclear if Walters himself started the fire, or if the fire was started by one of the officers of the station, possibly with the intention of murdering Walters. Walters had a relatively negative reputation in town. He was known as a womanizer and a drunk. Either way, the fire quickly engulfed the police station. Many eyewitnesses heard gunfire inside. It was the gunfire that prevented firefighters from getting too close to the burning building. When the officers inside spilled out, many of them were shooting at each other. There was little the firefighters could do to prevent the fire from spreading to the rest of town. No one knew why the police had started to attack each other, and when the police began shooting at the firefighters and civilians, the survivors fled in again. Witnesses would report seeing the mysterious priest in the middle of all the chaos. None of the survivors can say how the incident ended, although a later investigation concluded that no one who had remained at the scene of the fire had survived. Less than a week later, the town itself was completely abandoned in the decades since. Only one effort has been made to try and resettle there. In 1997, a parish in the same county wanted to turn some old properties around the town into affordable housing. However, the project was abandoned after less than 2 weeks. When asked why he'd chosen not to continue with his plans for Walden, the pastor simply stated that is his land, not God's. Within less than a month, the pastor was found dead on the highway outside of Walden. He was covered in flies. The town has sat abandoned since then, so I got into creepypastas just when it started to boom. A lot of people were posting their own stories or building up the lore behind some of the more popular characters. So you may have heard of Walden before. I was the one who wrote it about 13 years ago, but I don't remember the exact name of the forum I posted it to. Honestly, I doubt I could even find the original post if I tried. It was shared around a lot back then, but I don't really hear much about it these days. No one remembers the story about Walden, TX, and Fatherflies. And to be honest, that's kind of intentional. You see, some people got really into that story. I don't know how, but eventually some people found my email address. It did creep me out, but the first few emails were pretty harmless. Some weird fan art of Fatherflies, or some people asking for more backstory about him. I'm gonna be honest, I was just happy for the attention. But then I got really messed up. Someone started sending me pictures of rotting food crawling with maggots. Another sent a long, rambling message about them dedicating a church to Fatherflies out in Ohio. Another weirdo just sent news articles of the most violent tragedies they could find. The worst, though, was when someone sent me a video. It looked like it was recorded on a camcorder. The first few seconds were nothing but static that made a loud buzzing noise. And then the screen clears up to show a crying woman. She's sitting outside, eating dirt. She was shoveling handfuls of the stuff in her mouth. And then the video zooms out, showing her sobbing in front of an open grave as her hands picked up more dirt. That's when I decided it needed to stop. I deleted that email address and I nuked all my forum accounts, but not before I wrote a second story. This one was a lot shorter than the original. The gist of it: some new priest came along and exorcised Fatherflies. I made sure to kill him off permanently. Well, that second story got torn to shreds. People hated it, and that was kind of the point. People were supposed to hate it. I didn't want whatever sort of messed up fame came with being a creepypasta writer soon after. People stopped talking about Fatherflies and my story. My 15 minutes of obscure internet fame just fizzled out. I did try and write some other stories that weren't so freaky, but none of them really picked up any steam. After a few months, I stopped writing entirely. And well, I never really looked back, at least not until recently. I would have been more than happy to forget about the whole thing, but I guess someone else had other ideas. It started a couple of weeks ago with an email I received. It read, "Martin, you may run. you may hide, but remember, Father Flies. It had been years since I'd even thought about that story. I almost didn't recognize the name at first, and then it just all came back to me. So I deleted the email and I blocked the sender. I figured it was some former fan who'd somehow found my email. Maybe they're trying to mess with me, or they think I'd be flattered by the attention. I don't know. Either way, I wasn't going to waste my time on it. Not after what happened last time. Even when I got the second email, I just shrugged it off. I kept on trekking along. I figured it was from the same person, just using another address. I blocked him again and deleted the email. I did the same with the next email and the next and the next. By this point, I wasn't really even reading them anymore. I would see the subject line, then just delete and move on. It was a little annoying, sure, but there was a really easy fix to that. I just put a filter on my emails to send any email with the word Father Flies directly to the trash. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Once I had the filter on, I was able to forget about the thing relatively quickly. I figured that'd be the last of it, at least until someone broke into my house. I wasn't home when it happened. Jean and Frankie were some buddies of mine from work. They wanted to go out for drinks that night, and I figured, why the hell not? I told myself I was only going to stay for a few beers, but I ended up losing track of time looking back. That might have been the best mistake I have ever made. At 0 a.m., I finally called it a night. I got a cab to take me home, and I tried not to doze off on the ride back to my apartment. I was losing the battle when the cab turned onto my street. I was immediately struck by the flashing red and blue lights. I sat up, squinting at the cars parked outside my apartment. These were police cars. I stared at them, wondering what the hell was going on. I settled up with a cab driver before stumbling out to try and make it to the door. One of the officers stopped me. "Whoa, sorry, sir. Afraid I can't let anyone in right now," he said. "Why not? Why not? Why not? What's going on?" I slurred. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that right now, sir." "You're a resident of this building?" he asked. "Yeah, I am." "Okay. Can I ask what your apartment number is?" "April 4th, 21. I live there alone." "I got it. I got my keys and everything," I said, fumbling around in my pocket. "April 21st, he asked. "Are you Martin Sawyer?" "Yeah," I replied. "Oh, well, I'm Sergeant Miller. One of your neighbors called us a few hours ago. Are you aware of the fact that there's a man in your apartment right now? One of your neighbors noticed an unidentified man trying to break the door to your apartment down. We're in the process of getting him out, although he is fairly aggressive," he said. I couldn't help but glance toward the building. I could see the lights were on in my apartment. My heart began to race faster. Someone had broken into my apartment. Who the hell is it? I demanded. "Well, we'll be able to question him later. Right now we're just trying to get him out," Miller said. "Our officers on the scene mentioned he was armed, so we are proceeding with caution." Suddenly, I saw several officers leading a man through the front door of the building. This man, he didn't look like anyone else I'd ever seen before. He was sort of scrawny, with messy brown hair and sunken eyes the moment he saw me, though. He fought harder against the two officers holding him. He strained against his handcuffs as his wild eyes stared at me. His body jerked, and he bared his teeth like a caged dog. For a moment, he was almost able to break free and make a run at me, but two other cops came on to restrain the guy. They were almost dogpiling on him, forcing him to the ground as he screamed at me. "You? He wants you." Sergeant Miller and I watched as one of his officers teased the man. He screamed in agony, his body writhing in pain before going limp. As far as I could tell, he was still conscious, but he stopped fighting long enough for the cops to drag him over to his squad car. His eyes remained fixed on me as they moved him. Father Flies and is hungry. His eyes were still fixed on me as they finally loaded him into the back of the car. "Friend of yours?" Miller asked. "No," I murmured. "I don't know him." "Well, clearly he knows you. Tell you what, let me just collect a quick statement from you. Then we're just going to take a look around your place. I'd like you to look at us. Is that okay, Mr. Sawyer?" You'll let us know if anything's been stolen or vandalized." I nodded absent-mindedly. My attention shifted back up toward the window of my apartment, and as I looked up, I felt a sinking feeling. I saw another man up there staring down at me, and then he disappeared. They had to be one of the police, right? I mean, there still had to be cops up there, right? I try not to think about it. But the memory of my old story about Father Flies, it echoed in my mind. The next few hours drifted by in a haze. I think the alcohol contributed to that. I remember giving my statement to the sergeant. I told him about the emails and promised I'd bring him some printed out copies the next morning. After that, I went through my apartment with the police, making note of any damages. Surprisingly, there weren't a lot. Nothing had been stolen. Aside from breaking down the door, the intruder hadn't done much, but I knew I couldn't sleep there. I didn't feel safe in my own bed, not after what happened. So I packed as many things as I could fit in a backpack, and I called myself another cab. There were a few hotels down by the highway. Sure, probably wasn't that much safer than my apartment had been, but it made me feel a little better. I booked the cheapest room I could, and when I got there, I didn't even bother unpacking. I just crawled under the sheets and passed out. I had a nightmare. I don't know what it was about. I just remember the words. Remember Father Flies. When I woke up, I was bundled under the sheets of the hotel bed. I lay there for a bit, stuck between waking and sleeping. I was hungover and unsure what time it was, and for a moment I thought I saw something standing by my bed. I sat up quickly, but there was nothing. I was alone. I checked my phone. It's almost 5 p.m. My mind wandered back to the emails I'd gotten a few weeks back. I checked my trash folder to see if I could find them. Sure enough, there were plenty in there from plenty of burner email addresses. The ramblings were always different, but the more recent emails were a lot more violent. These newer ones, they talked about sacrifice, of my bones being snapped and my flesh being shared. If I'd read these ones before I'd put up the filter, I probably would have called the police. Whoever had written these emails was clearly disturbed, sending me all this over a story I'd written, a decade ago? Breaking into my home over it? I didn't even think anyone even remembered the story of Walden TX. I ended up searching for it online just to see if it had grown some sort of new following over the years. It hadn't. It took me a while to even find a re-upload of the original story, and there wasn't much traction on it. Most of the modern creepypasta community had all but forgotten about it, and the re-upload that I found only had around 4 comments on it. 2 of them were negative, one of them was nostalgic, and the fourth was just weird. It asked if the story was written by one of the actual survivors from Walden. Apparently, the commenter's dad had grown up there. Wait a minute. I read over that comment a couple of times. Someone's dad had grown up in Walden. This is a joke, a bot, just some dude online trying to roleplay. I decided to do some research. I typed in Walden, Texas on the search bar. It wasn't long before I actually found something. And what I found, it turned my blood to ice. There weren't a lot of articles on it, but there were enough. Enough to tell me that Walden was real, and that in 1982 it really had been abandoned after a huge fire destroyed most of it. It was hard to find much information beyond that, but the confirmation that Walden was real left me sitting in stunned silence. The town in my story was real. The fire was real. I scrolled through the search results a bit more. If the fire was real, what else about the story was true? There were a few more results about Walden, mostly old news articles, and a few blog posts about the abandoned town. But as I kept scrolling, the results started getting weird. I started seeing articles for a town called Sky in North Carolina. Nothing about it should be connected to Walden, but when I clicked on one of the links, it showed me a news article that told the story. That was disturbingly similar to Walden's. The sudden outbreaks of violence and a fire that scorched the town. Only this wasn't some creepypasta someone had written. This was a news article from 1964. I went back to the search results and kept scrolling. Beneath the article about Sky was one about a town called Bear Creek, Montana, a town that had been ravaged by violence in 1941. before a fire burned everything down. The timing wasn't exact, but it was close enough. 20 years before Sky, 40 years before Walden, 60 years. Before I wrote my story, I clicked back into the search results. I'd seen enough. I didn't know what to make of any of this, but I couldn't look at it anymore. I clicked the exit window, but the window didn't close. I clicked it again. Still nothing. I tried to move the mouse. It didn't move instead. The screen started scrolling down, showing me more search results. A fire in West End, Nebraska, 1922. A violent riot in Horseshoe Falls, Ohio, back in 1905. A killing spree in Nestview, Oklahoma, in 1886. It just kept going. A girl who'd slaughtered her parents and neighbors with a hatchet back in 2010. A man who'd burned down a hospital that same year. A mass stabbing in an old folks' home done by members of the staff, also in 2010. 2010, the year I posted that story. I couldn't close out the screen on my computer. I couldn't stop it from scrolling. It kept showing me more and more. The screen was scrolling faster now, and in between the articles, pictures started appearing. Crime scene photos, mugshots, funerals, fires, morgues, and then a figure, a priest in the middle of the flames, smiling next to a car crash. He was standing behind a man with a rifle, his hands forcing the man's eyes open as flies covered his lips. I slammed the laptop shut hard enough to crack the screen, and I sat there in silence. Trying to calm myself, I tried to rack my brain and come up with a logical explanation for all of this, but there was none. Something. Call it Father Flies or call it something else. It was reaching out to me. There was a sudden knock at the door. "Mr. Sawyer, you in there?" A voice asked. I paused. "Sergeant Miller." He pounded on the door again. "Mr. Sawyer, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been a development." "We need you to come down to the station," the voice said. I opened the door just a crack to look out at him. "Sergeant Miller," I asked. He tried to push the door open, but I stopped him. "What's going on?" "I'll explain in the car," he said. "Let's just get you out of here, okay? Pack your things, please." Yeah, sure. "Give me a sec, okay?" I replied. He nodded as I closed the door again. I never told anyone where I was staying. How the hell did Sergeant Miller find me here? Something about this felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt off. Miller pounded on the door again. "Will you hurry it up, Sawyer?" He snapped. I looked back. Miller was pounding on the door more aggressively now. The door was shaking. "Hang on," I said. "I'm packing." "No more time, Sawyer." "Open this door," he said. The door shook as he rammed his whole body into it. I could hear the wood starting to splinter. There were cracks opening in the door. I threw my weight against it to hold him off. "I'm tired of the game, Sawyer." "I don't know what the hell you're talking about," I said. "Of course, you know he's hungry, Sawyer. He's hungry for you. He's gonna rip you apart, son. He's gonna feed you to the maggots, and they're gonna chew through your tender flesh. It won't stop even when you die. It keeps going forever and ever and ever. Because that's what he is. That's what's waiting for you. You're gonna wish you could just die." The first gunshot blew through the door, just inches from my head. I dropped to the ground as Miller blew 4 more holes through the door. The mirror above the desk shattered as one of the stray bullets hit it. Behind the door, I could hear Miller cackling that laughter. It sounded nothing like the man I'd met the other night. It sounded like something else entirely. I crawled along the floor. I scrambled from the only cover I could find, the bed. Going under it wasn't an option. I wouldn't fit, but I could go behind it. I heard Miller kicking at the door again, and this time it dropped off its hinges completely, hitting the ground with a thud. "Where are you?" Miller hummed as he stepped into the room. My heart was racing. He was getting closer, and he still had the gun. He was going to kill me. From where I was hiding, I saw one of the shards of the broken mirror beside me. I grabbed it, feeling the sharp edges cut into my palm. I didn't know what I was planning, but I figured it'd be better to die fighting. Miller had almost reached the bed now. "There you are," he said. But as he rounded the corner, I lunged at him. I heard the gun go off. I felt a white-hot sting in my shoulder as the bullet grazed me, but I didn't die, and that's all that mattered at that moment. I drove my shard of broken mirror into his stomach as I tackled him into the wall. The two of us went to the ground together, grappling like wild animals. He tried to point the gun at my head, but I grabbed him by the wrist to keep it away. With my other hand, I seized the shard of broken glass I'd embedded in his stomach. I could feel it cutting into my hand as I pulled it free. Miller's eyes were locked on mine. He pushed back against me with all his remaining strength, pinning me to the ground. He grabbed me by the throat, and he aimed the gun at my head. Without thinking, I shoved the broken glass into his eye. Miller let out a pained cry, and I threw him off me, and in a frenzy I climbed back onto him. I could see him panic as I drove my shard of glass into his chest over and over again. Miller's one good I rolled back in its socket. His body twitched before going limp, but I kept on stabbing until the shard broke, leaving half of it in his chest. I collapsed beside him, panting and shaking, but I could still hear laughter. Laughter that sounded like what was coming out of Miller earlier. Only now it seemed to be coming from the radio. I stared down at it, listening to the distorted cackle of the thing on the other side. "Well done." A gentle voice crooned through the radio. There was a loud buzzing static in the background, but I could still hear the voice clearly. It made my skin crawl. I just stared at the radio, trying to figure out my next move. "A shame you chose to insult me last time. You were a wonderful host, before you chose to drag my name through the mud. But no matter what, we can write a new story together. A story that would never end." The voice chuckled again, only that chuckle didn't seem to be coming from the radio anymore. I looked up, and for a moment, I saw a figure by the door. Their backs were turned to me. I couldn't see their faces, but they were tall, dressed like priests. Maggots crawled over its thin hair, and flies surrounded it like a fuzzy halo. The figure briefly turned its head, revealing empty eye sockets, where the flies crawled out from. "What the hell are you?" I asked. For a moment, I saw him grin. An impossible, knowing grin that stretched far too wide. The voice on the radio spoke again. "I am what returns you. Back to the dust from whence you came, my child." I looked back at Sergeant Miller, and I could already see the maggots claiming him. And I saw before my eyes the maggots transform into flies in seconds, spreading themselves all over the corpse and making their way over to me. I felt them on my skin biting into me, and that was what made me finally move. I hissed in pain, and I swatted them off me. I looked around, and the figure was gone. I scrambled to grab what I could, and I bolted out of the room. I drove onto the open highway, and I didn't look back. That was over a week ago. I've heard there's been an uptick of violent crimes in my hometown since then. Apparently, Sergeant Miller had already put a bullet in several other officers before he paid me a visit. But he's not the only one. Gene's dead. Apparently, he and Frankie got into a brawl. Frankie won. Someone put my mother in the hospital the other day, and I've heard rumors of other incidents in the town and me. I'm still moving. I've had to kill 3 other people over the past few days, all strangers. All of them attacked me first. All of them. They had that same wild look in their eyes, and maggots in their hair. And when I'd finished doing what I had to do, I saw him afterwards, just watching in the shadows. I hope he's enjoying the show, because one of these days, it's going to be him. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm not entirely sure I can do it. But if he wants to create a new story with me, that's fine. But I'll decide how it ends. Some jobs just aren't worth it. Now, from the outside, Shady Glen looked like any other nursing home. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds were in bloom, and the windows were nice and shiny. If you drove by on a warm, sunny afternoon, you'd see them out there, elderly folks walking with nurses. No one would ever guess the horrors inside. When I first started working at Shady Glen, I was excited. I chose my career path as a nurse because I wanted to help people. Starting in a new facility, it meant making new friends and having a positive impact on someone's life. I'd already met so many wonderful people at my last job, and I hoped this would be the same. Sadly, those hopes were immediately ruined. Generally speaking, older people are friendly. Sure, you get a few grumps in the bunch, but most of them I like to talk to. I've been kept way over my shift many times by someone who just had to finish telling me a story from their youth or asked me to play a game of checkers. Don't get me wrong, I love staying a little late to spend time with them. And hell, I got really good at checkers if I do say so myself. And that was the reason I took this job, to make a difference. But I had one problem. No one at Shady Glen wanted to talk to me. I spent my break in the game room, and no one approached me. No little old lady with photos of her grandkids. No older guys ready to tell me stories of the war. They completely ignored me. I could see them watching me out of the corner of my eye. There was an old lady with cotton candy white hair in the corner reading a book, and she was just staring at me until I looked at her. Then she lifted the book and she pretended like she'd been reading all along, and she was definitely not the only one acting weird. Two men were pretending to play chess for the past 20 minutes. Too busy watching me to make any moves. As I got up and walked to the trash, I saw several heads turning in unison, tracking my movement. Except one. In the back of the room was a woman. She didn't bother to watch me like the others. She just stared out the window, slowly rocking back and forth in her chair. Except I noticed something weird. She didn't look old. She looked like she was somewhere in her 30s or early 40s. She had long black hair that fell down her back. There wasn't a gray strand on her head and her skin. Well, it was so pale. It's like she'd never seen the sun. Maybe she's visiting, I thought. But it was 10 a.m. and visiting hours started at noon, and she wasn't an employee. She wasn't wearing nurse's scrubs or a name tag. I picked up my things and decided to take the rest of my break somewhere else. I felt all their eyes on me, tracking my movement as I walked out into the hallway. Maybe they're just wary of new people, I thought. Maybe they're bored and wondering who this random new guy is. But the way all of them stared at me, it made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't a few nosy Nancys peering at me over a book. It was everyone in the room, like they could all communicate telepathically and were alerting each other to my presence or something. Except for the one weirdly young woman. She didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or not. I finally found myself back in the staff break room where a few other people were having some coffee. I decided to ask some questions to figure out what the deal was here. So, people here aren't very talkative, are they? I joked. One of the guys, a physical therapist, I think looked up at me. What do you mean? He asked. Well, no. The other places I've worked at, seniors are really friendly, like dying to tell me their entire life story. But here they're kind of quiet. Oh, yeah, they're all pretty private, he replied. Yeah. And what about that one woman? The one with the black hair, that really pale skin. Is she actually a patient here? Or, she looks way too young. Oh yeah, it's Elena. Yeah, she's a patient, he said. How old is she? I asked. He forced a smile. She's a lot older than she looks. Well, guess she really takes sunscreen seriously. I joked. She does not look a day over 40. He didn't reply to that. The other people there, two women in nursing scrubs, kind of side-eyed each other. Sorry, I gotta go, he said. Then he walked out, the nurses following him. Even though we still had 10 minutes of break left, I chewed my lip. So far, I was not making any friends, not with the seniors or the staff, which was very different from what I was used to. No, I'm not always the most popular person. But I am very outgoing, and I usually make friends very easily. But not here. I cleared my trash and I checked my schedule. My next patient was in room 40. See, I headed down the beige hallway, glancing at the rows and rows of doors that seemed to go on forever. I pulled up the patient's chart when I got in front of the door, and that's when I noticed something strange. The chart had a note scrolled across the top of it. It read, "Do not make eye contact with the patient." That's weird, I thought. Maybe they were antisocial. I paged through the chart, looking for details of their mental state, but there were none other than a note about how their memories started to fade. Well, whatever the case, I'd honor their wishes. Even if it made my extroverted self die a little bit inside. I pushed open the door and I saw a woman sitting on the bed. Long gray hair fell halfway over her face. She wore a plain white dressing gown, though it appeared stained and tattered. My eyes instinctually shot toward her face. Then I stopped myself and I looked down at the floor. "Hey, I'm Jeff. I said I will be taking care of you today." She didn't respond. "Is there anything I can get for you?" I asked. "Or is it okay if I start taking your vitals now?" She didn't say anything, but she nodded. I took that as a go-ahead. I pulled a metal chair toward her and sat down. "All right, this is going to pinch just a little, okay?" I said. Wrapping the blood pressure cuff around her upper arm, I kept my eyes on the dial as it climbed, avoiding all eye contact. I felt incredibly awkward, but respecting her wishes was, more important than anything. "Okay, all good. I'm just going to look in your ear now, okay?" I told her as I pulled out some equipment. I kept my eyes trained on her ear, but I could feel her watching me. Staring at me through her curtain of hair, I pulled out a tongue depressor. "Okay, and now I'm just going to have to take a look at your throat." She opened her mouth and I pressed the wooden stick down, but from this angle her eyes were just barely out of focus and I could see something looked off about them. They almost looked like they were too big for her face or too dark or something. Of course, I couldn't really tell, but something, it didn't look quite right. You know what? Maybe she had an eye appointment earlier today and, her pupils were dilated. That was the only possible explanation I could think of. Although it wasn't just her pupils that looked bigger, it was also her irises and, like the actual eyes themselves. Like she was using some weird Instagram filter to make everything about her eyes bigger. It was weird. I avoided making eye contact despite really wanting to. When I was done, I packed up my things, told her goodbye, and I made my way to the next patient. I did a great job, I told myself. As I made my way to room 37A, I respected her boundaries, and I bet she really appreciated that. Maybe this first day, it's not that awful after all. My enthusiasm was quickly deflated by the next patient. The man in room 37A was named Gerald. He was 86, according to the chart, but he looked like he could be 100. His body had shrunken in on itself, all folds and wrinkles. His tufts of white hair stood straight up, as if compensating for his loss in height, and he was friendlier than the others. As soon as I came in, he smiled at me. "Hey, hello, you're my new nurse." I nodded and introduced myself, and just like that, I was back in the game. Gerald was easy to talk to. He asked me how long I'd been a nurse and if I liked it here, and all the while he was smiling and telling me he was so happy to have me here. "My last nurse was so grumpy," he said, rolling his eyes. "But you seem like a nice fella." "Well, thanks," I replied. I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. It began to inflate. "So, Gerald, where'd you grow up?" And just like that, the vibe we had going was gone. His smile disappeared. He broke eye contact and looked vacantly at the wall. A great distance away from here, he finally muttered. I took the hint and I didn't ask any more questions, but after a minute he started talking again. He looked up. Milky gray, eyes boring into mine. "I come from a place where demons roam," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. "A place of eternal darkness." I stopped what I was doing, taken aback by that statement. Now, to be fair, I have worked with many patients who had dementia or mental conditions, and this was by far the most disturbing thing I have ever heard. One man I'd worked with suffered from paranoia. Every day, he'd recount the death threats he received in painstaking detail. He was convinced people wanted him dead in extremely violent ways. Because, you see, he worked for a top-secret government agency. There was a woman, too, who told me about the skinny woman hiding under her bed. After strict observation, we realized she was confusing some storage boxes for a human being. It's hard being that old. When your mind starts blurring the lines between fiction and reality. And there is a fine line dealing with people in this state. You don't want to encourage their delusions, but you also want to make sure that they feel heard. "Oh, well, you must feel happier here," I said. He paused for a moment. "I am happier here," he replied. "Hey, that's great," I replied with a smile. I finished taking his vitals, grabbed the iPad, and I started back into the hallway. As I flipped through the document, however, I noticed there was no note of dementia or any other mental condition. In fact, Someone had checked his mental state. "Jeff," a voice called out from behind me. I turned. The old man had followed me into the hallway. He was standing several yards behind me, perfectly still. "Hey, yeah, you need something," I called. He shook his head. "They roam here, too. They're demons. They're just not as loud." "Okay," I said, nodding and giving him a wave. And then I wrote a note in his chart. Under mental conditions, I wrote talks about demons. Okay, who is next? Someone on the second floor by the name of Mary Gonzalez. I took the elevator, and I walked down the hallway. She'd be at the end in room 29B. And it wasn't just the people who were a little off. There was something about the beige hallways. The endless doors with little square windows in them. The slightly distorted music repeating on loop. Seriously, it sounded like a cassette player on a low battery. Oh, I shuddered. Maybe I'll send out more applications. I did not like it here by any stretch of the word. The stairs, the weird interactions. My standoffish coworkers. There was a weird feeling to this place, and as I walked down the hallway, I saw something even weirder. One of the doors had a padlock on it. I stopped and backed up to 26C. The number was faded, and the window was completely dark. Maybe it's empty, but why lock it then? I stared down at the padlock. That certainly was not legal, unless the patient was a risk to others. But, even then they should have been transferred to a hospital or something. They shouldn't be kept here behind a locked door. I leaned in toward the window. Totally dark. Not even the hallway lights could help me see what was inside. What the hell? I cupped my hands against the window, peering in, and then it happened. On the other side of the glass, an eye blinked open. I jumped back in surprise. My ankle twisted, my feet slipping underneath me, and I fell hard. I scrambled up. Above me, there was something moving in the window. A mass of black hair parted slightly to reveal an eye. Now I realized the lights in the room were on. The window had only been dark because she'd been pressed against it, watching me. And I recognized her pale skin, thick black hair. Far too young to be here. It was the woman I'd seen earlier. I got up and I ran down the hallway. I didn't stop until I'd reached 29B. Before I entered, I took a second to get a hold of myself. Deep breath in, deep breath out. My hands were shaking. My legs felt weak and wobbly beneath me. Maybe she just has a mental condition. Needs to be housed here for a little while. I don't know, I thought. It's just a woman, not a monster. So she was staring at you from the window. So what? She wasn't screaming or threatening you. But then why the padlock? I forced myself to take another deep breath in, and another. I didn't open the door until I felt like I was completely relaxed. Give them your best, I told myself, like you'd done many times before. I swung the door open. Mary sat in front of the window, looking down at the courtyard below. She was humming softly to herself, a tune I didn't recognize, however, from my high school music training. I could tell it wasn't a minor key. "Hey, how are you doing today, Mary?" I asked. She didn't answer. Didn't turn around to look at me. Just continued humming the same 4 notes over and over. Mary, more humming. I pulled out the iPad and I flipped through her chart, and it was then that I noticed the note. The patient is nonverbal. All right, well, that made sense. No creepy weirdness here. Just, a nonverbal patient. I pulled a chair up and I sat down next to her, narrating what I was doing so that I wouldn't startle or scare her. "I'm going to put the blood pressure cuff on you now, okay? All right. Just going to look in your ear." I looked in her ear for any signs of inflammation or infection, but as I did, my heart stopped. There was a shadow, nestled right next to her eardrum. As soon as the light hit it, it skittered out of sight. What the hell? I tugged on her ear and I readjusted the equipment. No, there was nothing there. No shadow. Her ear. It was totally fine. I put the scope down and I rubbed my eyes. Stress is getting to you, I told myself. I took another deep breath in, deep breath out. It was just a shadow that moved when I moved the scope. Nothing more. Your ears look great, Mary, I said, but my voice didn't have that same chipper tone. I finished the exam. Mary continued to hum to herself the same 4 notes over and over, except she was humming faster now. I packed up my stuff, took another deep breath, and I walked out into the hallway. I closed my eyes as I passed room 26C. I took the elevator down to floor 1, and I ate my lunch alone. I didn't want to talk to anyone right now. I was just going to slog through the day and send out my job applications tonight. Hopefully, I'd find something else within a week or 2 at the worst. Oh God, I hope it's not a month. I can't survive a month in this place, I thought as I finished my turkey sandwich. It is just too weird. Surprisingly, however, the afternoon went smoothly. No weird demon talk, no creepy humming. Just regular people. They didn't say much, but that was okay with me. As late afternoon crept into the evening, the staff thinned out and most of the residents returned to their rooms. At 7:45, I began packing up, more than ready to hand everything over to the night shift. But of course, it wasn't that easy. My boss poked his head in and asked if I could check in with one more patient. The night shift nurse was running late, and like an idiot, I agreed. I was already on the 2nd floor when I realized it was room 26C. The woman who looked far too young to be here. I wanted to turn around and run, but I needed this job, even if it was only for the next few weeks. And besides, they wouldn't keep someone violent here. That would be illegal. Sure, the padlock was there, but it didn't change the law. Maybe the padlock was for her own safety, to keep her from running away. That is definitely completely illegal, but I don't know. Just 15 minutes with her. You're getting another job soon, I told myself. I pulled out the iPad and I paged through her chart, but most of it was blank. Her name was filled in with Elena with a long last name that sounded Polish or Czech from the number of consonants, but there was just a dash for her birth date. Did they not know her age? And there was nothing under the current medication section. No chronic illness either. No diabetes, no arthritis, not even hearing loss. If she truly didn't have any of these things, why was she here? Or did someone give me an incomplete chart? Better yet, if this chart was incomplete, maybe it would give me an excuse to not do the exam today and to just get the hell out of here. If she had some underlying medical condition I wasn't aware of, it could be a liability. I walked down the hallway and after a second found one of the doctors on staff. Hey, I think this chart for Elena is incomplete, I told him. No, that's a shot. He replied as he gave it a quick once-over. But nothing's filled in. Doesn't even have her birth date, I said. We don't know her birth date. I stared at him. You don't know her birth date. He shook his head. Okay, what about the approximate age then? Or medical conditions? The entire thing. It's just blank. I'm confused. The doctor stared back at me. I assure you the chart is accurate, he replied in a strangely firm tone. And then he turned on his heel, and he walked away. I did not understand what was going on here. A little voice in the back of my head told me to get out. Nothing about this felt right. I walked back to Elena's room now, and someone had already undone the padlock for me. I took a deep breath, and then I opened the door. Elena was sitting next to the window, facing away from me. Black hair fell down the back of her chair, and her pale arms hung limply at her sides. Hi, I'm Jeff. I called from the doorway, my heart pounding. Oh, I'll be taking your vitals this evening. She didn't reply. That was fine by me. I'd rather her ignore me than need an alternative. I pulled up a chair next to her and I unfolded the blood pressure cuff. The Velcro zipped loudly in the silent room. I'm going to take your blood pressure now, I told her. No response. I wasn't sure if I was narrating what I was doing for her sake or to calm my own nerves. I wrapped it around her upper arm. The rhythmic sound of the cuff inflating filled the silence. Still, she wouldn't turn to look at me or acknowledge my presence in any way. She just stared out the window, the harsh shadows making her skin appear even paler than before. The blood pressure cuff continued to inflate, and Elena continued to stare out the window, ignoring me completely. All right, this will all be over soon, I thought. log the vitals, and get the hell out of here. Except there was a problem. I wasn't getting a blood pressure reading. That's weird. I squinted at the dial, and then I reached up and pulled it off her arm. Sorry, I think I might have messed it up. But a second and third attempt failed. I couldn't get a reading. I swallowed my throat dry. Okay, screw it. Elena, I'm going to take your blood pressure later, okay? For now, I'm just going to check your ears, all right? No response. She still wouldn't turn towards me. I may as well have been completely invisible. I glanced towards her reflection in the window to try and read her expression, and every muscle in my body froze. She didn't have a reflection. All I saw was my horrified face staring back at me. No, 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 that's not possible. I stood up, the chair skidding out from underneath me. I stumbled towards the hallway, dropping the blood pressure cuff in the process. I'm sorry. I'm going to come back later, okay? I muttered, scrambling to the door. A shuffling sound came from behind me. I whipped around, and the woman had finally turned to look at me, but her body was still facing the window. She had turned her head all the way around in a way no human could. I ran as fast as I could, down the hallway, around a corner, my feet slapping against the floor as I passed the game room. I saw a few heads turning toward me, tracking my movement, but I didn't stop. I just kept running. And then I heard it. The woman was following me. She was crawling along the hallway on all fours, like something possessed. Her head hung upside down, her thick black hair dragged along the floor. Her mouth was twisted into a smile, and her teeth, my God, her teeth. They were pointed, all of them, into needle-fin fangs. Her palms slapped against the linoleum as she crawled toward me like a spider. Her mouth froze in that horrible grin. I forced myself to run faster. I was almost there, almost at the elevator. I looked back. She was so fast, crawling towards me. Something grabbed my arm then. My entire body jerked, but I wasn't being pulled backward. I was being pulled to the right into a room. The door slammed shut, and I found myself face to face with another nurse. It was one of the nurses I'd seen earlier in the break room. She looked at me with wide eyes, breathing hard. What is she? I breathed, backing away from the door. You can't do that, she replied. I can't do what? I asked. I'm not going to hurt you, she said. I'm trying to keep you safe. You can't run away from them like that. They smell fear. Once they're here, they know you. They know your smell. They'll follow you. Anywhere in the world you go, you'll be followed. But if you stay here and you don't run and you do what you're asked, you'll be safe, she said. What the hell are you talking about? They'll follow you. If you run out of this building, they will follow. They don't want their secrets to leave this place. Do you understand? So just do your job. Don't show fear and you'll be safe, she said. And then she unlocked the door and swung it open. Now I think you have an exam to finish, she said. Maybe I should have listened to her. This woman was probably looking out for my own goods, looking to protect me. She did just save me, after all, but as soon as she opened that door, I shot out and I ran into the elevator. I pounded the closed doors button as Elena skittered down the hall, and the nurse shouted after me. The door shut, and the elevator car went down, down, down. I raced out into the parking lot, and I got in my car. The engine thrummed underneath me, and I peeled out of there, but not before taking one last look at Shady Glen. There was someone watching me from a second-story window. Someone with thick black hair and pale skin. I swallowed, and then I turned onto the road and floored it. I spent the evening trying to forget everything that happened. I got a voicemail from my boss asking where I went, but I ignored it. I got a few calls from unknown numbers, and I ignored those too. The nightmare at Shady Glen was over. I was done with that place. The patients there aren't human. They're monsters. The woman with the eyes that were too big. The man who talked about demons. The woman with that thing in her ear. And of course, Elena. That entire building, from the patients to the endless halls. The nightmare was over. Or so I thought. Unfortunately, I woke up with a start at 3:06 a.m. As I stirred into consciousness, I realized what woke me up was a noise, a soft tap, tap, tap coming from somewhere. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and I stood up, trying to find the source of the noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. I made my way to the stairs, my heart pounding. I typed in 911 on my phone, ready to press the call. The tapping continued as I made my way down the stairs. When I got to the bottom, I turned towards the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. Someone was tapping at the sliding glass door. Someone with long black hair, pale skin, and needle-like teeth. Elena. I ducked out of sight, but as soon as I did, the tapping got faster. She'd seen me. I ran back up the stairs, my heart pounding. The nurse's warning echoed in my head. They'll follow you. Anywhere in the world you go, you'll be followed. But if you stay here and you don't run and you do what you're asked, you'll be safe. I got back to my bedroom, and I slammed the door shut, locked it, pulled the dresser across it. I called 911, and they said they'd be here soon. Then I got in the closet, closed the door, and waited for a few minutes. I didn't hear anything, just pure silence. Maybe she left, I told myself. The police will be here any minute. I took deep breaths, trying to slow my heart, trying to relax. But then the tapping. It was coming from my bedroom window. My second-story bedroom window. I didn't look, but I could imagine her spider-like body clinging to the side of my house, her long fingers tapping against the glass, thick black hair falling over her face. A minute later, I heard sirens, and the tapping stopped. I heard a scuttling sound as she made her way down my house. And then there was nothing. The sirens grew louder, and I knew I was safe. Except I wasn't safe, was I? I never would be, according to that nurse. Unless I came back. So that morning, after 0 hours of sleep and 3 cups of coffee, I drove to Shady Glen. I passed the manicured lawns and the old people sitting on the benches. I walked through the front doors, down the endless beige hallways, and I listened to the music through the speakers. I picked up the iPad, and I checked my first assignment. As I went to the 4th floor, I said one thing over and over to myself. Don't show fear. My name is Rick, and for 3 years I've run this little diner off the highway. It's called Blue Ridge Diner, named after the mountains that aren't too far from here. The place isn't much, just a squat retro building with a flickering neon sign that I've been meaning to fix but never quite get around to it. Inside, it's all chrome and red leather boots, the kind of place my dad used to say had character. It was his diner before it was mine, but he passed away during my last year of college. Heart attack. One moment he was fine, and the next he was gone. That's life, I guess. I didn't plan on running the diner. I had dreams. Nothing too big. Just moving to the city, getting a steady job. Maybe traveling a little. But when Dad died, I came back to take care of things. And one thing led to another. Before I knew it, I was wiping down the counter, flipping the open sign at 6 o'clock every morning and closing up at 10 every night. The diner was all he left me, and letting it go felt wrong, like losing him all over again. So here I am. It's not a busy place. Most of the time it's just me, the hum of the old jukebox in the corner, and the occasional trucker or lost traveler. Regulars are rare, but there's a steady enough trickle of customers to keep the lights on. The coffee's decent. The food's better than you'd expect. And the pie, my dad's recipe. It's damn near perfect. People say it's worth the drive, but they never come back a second time. And, that's fine by me. I live in the apartment upstairs. It's small but cozy. A single room with a kitchenette and a bed that sags in the middle most nights after I lock up. I go upstairs, make myself a sandwich, and fall asleep watching old movies. It's a quiet life, predictable, and yet maybe a little lonely, but it suits me. I like the quiet. Give me time to think. The diner has a secret, though, and it's the kind of secret that could ruin everything if it got out. I don't know how it started or who first discovered it, but it's real. I've seen it happen too many times to doubt it. If you order a coffee, just a plain black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and you follow the rules, you can talk to someone who's gone, someone you've lost. They'll sit across from you in the booth looking just like you remember, and you can talk to them until the coffee goes cold. The rules are simple but strict. First, you have to drink the coffee before it gets cold. No exceptions. If you don't, they leave and you can't get them back. Second, you can't touch them. I don't know why, but it's part of the deal. And third, you can only do it once. No repeats, one coffee, one conversation. I didn't make the rules. I don't even know how they work. All I know is that they do. My dad told me about it before he died. Said it had been part of the diner for as long as he could remember. He never used it, though, and neither have I. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the new guy walked in. I was behind the counter, wiping down the same spot I'd already wiped down 3 times when the door jingled and he stepped inside. He was tall and thin, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that made him look like he hadn't slept in days. He paused just outside the door, taking in the empty booths and the hum of the jukebox, then made his way to the counter. "Coffee," he said, sliding onto a stool. "Black." I nodded, grabbed a mug, and poured from the pot. As I set it in front of him, he looked up at me, his eyes sharp and searching. "This is the place, right?" I froze for a second, then forced myself to keep moving, wiping my hands on a towel. "What place are you talking about?" "You know," he said, "the place where you can talk to someone." I didn't answer right away. Most people don't come in knowing about the coffee. They hear about it by accident or stumble on it themselves. But this guy knew he wasn't guessing. "Who told you that?" I asked. "A friend," he said, his fingers drumming on the counter. "Is it true?" I glanced around at the empty diner. "If you're asking, you already know the answer." His shoulders sagged like he'd been holding his breath and finally let it out. "How does it work?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "You order a coffee. You drink it. They show 'em. Simple as that." He stared at the mug in front of him, his hands trembling slightly. "And they look real." "Yeah, real enough," I said. "And I can ask them anything, like talk about anything," he asked. "Until the coffee goes cold," I replied. I watched as he picked up the mug, his hands shaking so badly that some of the coffee sloshed over the rim. He took a sip, wincing at the bitterness, then set it down. For a moment, nothing happened. And then slowly, the air in the diner seemed to shift. It wasn't anything you could see or hear, just a feeling like the room was holding its breath. And then there she was. She appeared in the booth across from him, looking as solid and real as if she'd walked in off the street. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long blonde hair and a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The guy stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, like he was trying to speak but couldn't find the words. "Hi, Sam," she said. Her voice is soft and warm. "Emma," he whispered. "Is it really you?" I turned away, giving them as much privacy as I could in a place with no doors and thin walls. It wasn't my business what they talked about, and I didn't want to know. I busied myself with wiping down the counter, refilling the napkin dispensers, anything to keep my hands busy while they spoke in hushed tones. By the time the coffee was almost gone, I could tell it was winding down. Sam's voice was desperate now, like he was trying to cram a lifetime's worth of words into a few final minutes. I didn't have to look to know she was fading. That's how it always ended. The coffee would go cold and they'd disappear, leaving nothing behind but an empty mug and a lot of questions. When it was over, Sam sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat across from him. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes red and his face pale. "Thank you," he said. I nodded. "You're welcome." As he got up to leave, he hesitated, looking at me like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if he should. He didn't press me, just nodded and left. I watched him go, the door jingling softly behind him, then turned back to the counter. The empty mug sat there, a faint ring of coffee staining the bottom. I picked it up, washed it, and put it back on the shelf. It was late afternoon when the bell over the door jingled again. A young woman stepped inside, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She couldn't have been older than 19, maybe 20. She glanced around the diner, her eyes lingering on the empty booths before settling on me behind the counter. "Hi, are you Rick?" she asked. That's me. What can I get you? She hesitated, biting her lip. I heard. I heard you can do something here. Something special. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Depends on what you mean by special. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away. I want to talk to my grandmother just for a little bit. Is that okay? I studied her for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, that's okay. You know the rules. She shook her head. Drink the coffee before it goes cold. Don't touch them, and you only get one chance. You got it. She nodded quickly, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. I got it. I poured her a mug of coffee and set it on the counter. She picked it up carefully, like it was something fragile, and carried it to a booth near the window. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the mug like she wasn't sure if she should take the first sip. Then slowly, she raised it to her lips and drank. The diner grew quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy with expectation. I stayed behind a counter, giving her space while she waited. It didn't take long. A woman appeared across from her hair silver, and her face lined with wrinkles. She looked kind, her smile soft and warm, the way you'd imagine a grandmother should look. I didn't eavesdrop, but their voices carried across the empty diner. I don't know what to do, Grandma, the young woman said, her voice trembling. I got into 2 schools. One's close to home, but the other school's in California. I don't know which one to pick. The older woman reached out like she wanted to take her hand, but stopped just short, her fingers hovering above the table. Follow your heart, honey. Do what feels right, but don't be afraid to take a chance. Sometimes the best things come when you step outside your comfort zone. They talked for a little while longer, their conversation soft and full of the kind of love that made your chest ache. When the coffee was almost gone, the young woman's voice grew hurried, like she was trying to hold on to the moment for just a little longer. I miss you so much, Grandma. I know, sweetheart, the older woman said, but I'm always with you. You'll be okay. And then she was gone. The young woman sat there for a few moments, wiping her eyes before coming back to the counter. She set the empty mug down and smiled at me, her face still damp, but grateful. Thank you, she said. That meant everything to me. I nodded, not trusting myself to say too much. Good luck with school. She smiled again, then left, the bell over the door jingling softly behind her. The next customer came in about an hour later. He was older, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with a face that looked like it'd seen its fair share of hard times. He walked with a limp and had an air about him that suggested he didn't take no for an answer. He didn't look around or hesitate. Just walked straight up to the counter and sat down. Coffee, he said. Black. I poured him a cup and slid it across the counter. He picked it up, stared at it for a moment, then looked at me. You do that thing here, right? The conversation thing. I nodded. Yeah, you know the rules. I know the rules, he said. He glanced around the diner, then leaned closer. I want to talk to someone who is an accountant, he said bitterly. Bastards stole from me. Took everything. I hesitated. Most people came here to reconnect, to say things they never got the chance to say. Not this guy, but it wasn't my place to judge. Okay, I said. Just remember, no touching and drink the coffee before it goes cold. He didn't respond. Just took a long sip and set the mug down. A moment later, the booth in the corner was no longer empty. A man appeared, dressed in a cheap suit with thin glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked startled at first, glancing around like he didn't understand where he was. Then his eyes settled on the customer, and his expression hardened. Gary, the accountant said. Gary spat, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. You ruined me. You stole everything I had. I did my job, the accountant said coldly. You were the one who didn't read the fine print. Don't give me that, Gary snapped. I trusted you. I won the lottery, and you bled me dry. Their voices rose, sharp and angry. I kept my distance, pretending to busy myself with a napkin dispenser. But I couldn't help listening. You could have stopped, Gary said. You could have left me something. You know, anything. The accountant shrugged, his expression indifferent. Well, the thing is, I don't like you, Gary. Gary's hand shook then, and for a moment I thought he might lunge across the table instead. He grabbed the mug and threw it to the floor. It shattered on impact, the sound echoing through the diner. Coffee splattered across the tiles, dark and steaming. The accountant disappeared instantly, like a switch had just been poof-flipped. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. Gary stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then he turned and stormed out the diner without another word, the door slamming shut behind him. I sighed, grabbing a mop and a dustpan. As I cleaned up the mess, I couldn't help but think about what had just happened. I'd always assumed the only way to end a service was to let the coffee go cold. Apparently, there was another way. Smashing the cup ended it just as abruptly. I made a mental note and carried on. The rain was relentless that night, drumming against the diner's windows. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting flickering red and blue reflections onto the wet pavement. I just finished mopping up the floor from the earlier incident when the bell over the door jingled again. A man stepped inside, shaking rain off his coat and stomping his boots on the mat. He was broad-shouldered, with sharp features and an air of authority. His eyes, though, told a real story. They were tired, heavy with something deeper than just a lack of sleep. "You Rig?" he asked. "That's me," I said, leaning on the counter. "What can I do for you?" The man looked around the empty diner, as if making sure no one else was there. Then he walked up to the counter and pulled out a badge, holding it just long enough for me to see before tucking it away. "Detective Andrews," he said. "I've heard some things about this place." I sighed, already knowing where this was going. "What kind of things?" He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "That you have a service, something to do with coffee." "In the dead." I studied him for a moment. He didn't look like the type to believe in rumors, let alone act on them. But there he was, standing in my diner on a rainy night, desperation etched into every line on his face. "You know the rules?" I asked. "I've heard of him," he said. "Drink the coffee before it goes cold. No touching. One chance only." "Then you know how it works," I said. "Who do you want to talk to?" He hesitated. "A man named Victor King." The name sent a chill down my spine. Even I'd heard of Victor. Kane, the infamous serial killer who terrorized the region years ago. He was dead now, killed in a prison riot, but his crimes had left scars that hadn't healed. "Why him?" I asked. Andrews run a hand through his reins so dare, his eyes darting to the window before locking onto mine. "There's another killer out there. We found a body yesterday, mutilated in ways I will not describe. But there were details. Details that matched Kane's work. Problem is, Kane's dead. If this is a copycat, they're taking it to a whole new level. I need answers, Rick. And if there's even a chance that bastard knows something, I'll take it." I hesitated. Everything about this felt wrong. But it wasn't my place to say no. "You're sure about this? Do I look like I have another option?" He said, sighing and then softening his tone. "I'm sorry, just please let me do this." I nodded reluctantly and poured him a cup of coffee. As I set it on the counter, I couldn't help but feel like I was lighting a fuse on a bomb. Andrews took the mug, his hand steady, despite the weight of what he was about to do. He carried it to a booth in the corner and sat down, staring at the coffee like it might bite him. And then, with a deep breath, he took a sip. The diner went still, that heavy, expectant silence settling over everything. I stayed behind a counter, watching as Andrews sat rigid in his seat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the diner seemed to grow colder, and a figure appeared across from him. Victor Kane was exactly as I'd imagined him from the old mugshots. Tall, gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. But there was something off about him. He didn't just look real, he looked wrong. His presence filled the diner like a storm cloud. Andrews didn't flinch. "Victor Kane," he said, his voice steady. The ghost smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile that made you want to run. "Detective Andrews," he said. "What an unexpected pleasure." "I need information," Andrews said, cutting straight to the point. "There's a killer out there mimicking your work. I need to know who it could be." Kane leaned back, crossing his arms. Oh, I'm flattered. Really I am. But why would I help you? Because if you don't, more people will die, Andrew said. And I don't even think you want someone stealing your spotlight. Kane's smile widened. You're wrong about that. I don't mind a little competition. Keeps things interesting. This isn't a game, Kane. Just tell me what you know. The ghost expression darkened, his smile fading. You don't get it, do you? You think I have answers? But I don't. Whoever this is, they're not copying me. They're surpassing me. And frankly, I think that's beautiful. Andrew slammed his hand on the table. Damn it, Kane. People are dying. Don't you care at all? Kane began to laugh. Care? Oh, detective. You really don't understand me at all. The moment Kane said that, the air in the diner shifted. Plates began to rattle on shelves. The lights flickered. My heart pounded as I watched one of the plates fly off the cabinet and smash against the window. Another followed, then another. The sound of shattering ceramic echoing through the small space. Kane stood, his presence looming larger now. Oh, detective, you thought you could control this? You thought I'd play by your rules. Before either of us could react, he turned his head sharply, his dark eyes locking onto something or someone behind me. I followed his gaze and froze. Maggie, the waitress who worked the evening shifts on occasion. I was standing by the counter, holding a tray of clean silverware. She looked stunned, her mouth slightly open as she stared at Kane. I didn't even know she'd come in. She must have slipped through the back door to avoid the rain. Kane's smile widened and faster than I thought possible. He was next to her, a knife, one of ours in his hand, and he held it against her neck. Maggie let out a sharp gasp, her tray clattering to the floor, forks and knives scattering everywhere. Not another step, Kane said. Oh, don't worry, Rick, I'm not going to kill her yet. I just want to see what happens when I break all your little rules. What the hell is this? Andrew said. He's a ghost. He shouldn't be able to touch her. Shouldn't, no, but can, Kane said, pressing the blade closer to Maggie's skin. And isn't this fun? I grabbed the coffee cup from the table where Andrews had been sitting and hurled it to the ground, smashing it into a dozen pieces. Kane didn't even flinch. Nice try, but I don't think your little parlor trick works like you think it does. Rick, Andrews said, keeping his gun trained on Kane. What do we do? My mind was raised. The rules. I thought about the rules. Until the coffee gets cold, that was the only way to end it. The coffee. My eyes darted to the table. The mug was shattered, but the liquid had pooled on the floor. It was still warm. The faint steam rising from it confirmed that while Kane's attention was on Andrews, I bolted behind the counter, grabbing the first thing I could find, a pitcher of water. Without thinking, I rushed back to the table and poured the cold water over the coffee on the floor. The reaction was immediate. Kane stiffened, his head snapping toward May, the knife falling from his hand. And clattering under the tiles, his form flickered like a bad signal on an old TV. He let out a low, guttural sound, his face twisting into something far more inhuman than it had been before. And then he was gone. Just like that, the diner was silent again, except for Maggie's quiet sobs and the steady patter of rain. Maggie stumbled across from where Kane had been, clutching her arms as if trying to hold herself together. It's over, I said. Andrews lowered his gun, his expression dark. You knew that would work. I didn't know, I admitted. But the rules said until the coffee gets cold. I figured maybe cold water would work. Andrews nodded slowly, holstering his gun. I turned to Maggie, who was still trembling. You okay? She nodded weakly, though her face was pale. I think so. Go home, I said softly. Get some rest, all right? I'll cover the rest of your shift. She nodded again, her movements stiff, and hurried out the back door, disappearing into the rain. Andrew stayed for a moment longer, his jaw tight and his eyes burning with frustration. I'm sorry, he said. Finally. I didn't know it would get out of control like that. It's all right. It's not your fault, I said. He nodded. I thought I could handle it. But hell, I don't know what I thought. I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. He turned toward the door. Thanks for stepping in, Rick. You saved her. Yeah, I said, not looking at him. Just don't come back for this, all right? Not for this. Andrews didn't reply. He just pushed the door open and walked down into the rain, leaving me alone with the broken pieces of ceramic, the spilled water, and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. I grabbed the mop again and got to work. The days after the incident with Detective Andrews passed in a blur. The diner was back to its usual rhythm, quiet with just enough business to keep the lights on. Regulars didn't mention anything unusual, and new customers were none the wiser. But for me, things weren't the same. The memory of Victor Kane's ghost still lingered in the back of my mind. Every time I brewed a pot of coffee, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something or someone to appear. I told myself it was over, that I'd followed the rules and put it behind me. But late at night, when the diner was empty and the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards, the weight of it pressed down on me. I'd gotten forgetful, leaving salt shakers unfilled and neglecting to flip the sign to open a couple mornings. Maggie had been patient, gently reminding me of the small things. But she didn't blame me. Nobody did. The weight of running the diner was starting to feel heavier than ever. It was late one night, early morning really, when it happened. The clock on the wall read 3:18 a.m. and the diner was empty. Rain pattered softly against the windows, a gentle rhythm that made the night feel even quieter. I was trying to keep busy, scrubbing the already clean counter for the third time when I decided to make myself a cup of coffee. I didn't think much about it, just grabbed a mug, poured it black, and set it on the counter. I didn't drink it right away. Just let it sit there as I turned to organize the napkins and condiments. The smell of the coffee filled the air, warm and familiar, and for the first time in weeks, I felt some comfort. And then I heard it. Ricky. I froze. The voice was low and soft, coming from just behind me. My heart skipped a beat. There was only one man who ever called me Ricky. My dad. I turned slowly, my eyes landing on the coffee mug sitting on the counter. And then I saw him. He was sitting on one of the stools, just like he used to when we worked together. He looked exactly as I remembered, broad shoulders, slightly graying hair, and that easy smile that could light up a room. His favorite flannel shirt was neatly tucked into his jeans, and his hands rested casually on the counter, like he'd been there all along. Hey kiddo, he said, his voice warm and familiar. I stared at him, my throat tightening. Dad? Yeah, he said. It's me. I didn't know what to say. 100 thoughts raced through my mind, but none of them made it past my lips. Finally, I managed. I didn't mean to call you. I know, he said, nodding toward the coffee. I guess it just worked out that way. I sank under the stool across from him, my hand shaking slightly. How are you here? He chuckled. Same way all those other folks show up, I suppose. You made the coffee, and well, I figure it was about time we had to talk about what? I asked. About you and this place, he said. We sat there in silence for a moment. Finally, he spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. You've been doing a good job, Ricky. Better than I ever could hope for. Keeping the place running, looking after it like it mattered. I'm proud of you. I felt a lump in my throat and looked down at my hands. I didn't want to let you down. You haven't, he said. Not once, but Ricky. It's time to let go. I looked up at him, startled. What do you mean? This diner? He began. It's a part of me. Sure, a part of us. But it's not all there is. Not for you. I shook my head, the words catching in my throat. I don't know how to let it go, Dad. It's all I've had since you left. He reached out like he wanted to touch my hand, but stopped just short, his fingers hovering above the counter. I know, son, but this isn't your dream. Never was. You stayed because you thought you had to. Because you're a good son. But you've been holding on to this place and to me for too long now. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away. I don't even know what I want anymore. I haven't thought about it in so long. Yes, you do, he said. You've always wanted something different than this. You wanted to move to the city, chase your dreams. You wanted to live your life. You still can. You're still young. This place doesn't have to hold you back. But what about? I started, but he cut me off gently. I'll always be with you, Ricky, no matter where you go or what you do. You don't need this diner to remember me. You've already got me here. He tapped his chest right over his heart. I looked away. I don't know how to say goodbye. You don't have to, he said. You're not saying goodbye to me, just to this place. It's okay to move on, Ricky. You've done your part. We talked for a while after that about little things and big things, about memories of him teaching me to cook. And the time we stayed up late, fixing the leaky roof. His voice was steady, calm, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The coffee was growing cold, and I knew our time was running out. He seemed to know it too, his smile turning bittersweet. Ricky, he said, promise me you'll think about what I said. Promise me you'll take that step. I nodded, my voice cracking. I promise. Good, he said. That's my boy. And then he was gone. The stool he'd been sitting on was empty, and the only thing left was the faint smell of coffee and the sound of the rain. I sat there for a long time, staring at the mug in front of me. The coffee was cold now, untouched, but the warmth in my chest remained. My dad was right. It was time to let go, time to move on. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to find out.